Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be finally talking about the newest album from You Me at 6, called Night People. So, I don't really cover a lot of pop punk and pop rock. And hey, that happens. Even this early in the year, my schedule's filling up really fast. But it also means that outside of the acts that crossed over and made a significant impact in the mainstream, I haven't really kept up with what's going on in the scene, especially if they broke trying to capitalize on that big trend in the mid-2000s and never really caught on that much, more of a B-list act. Now, one thing that I tend to know is that it tends to be more of an American scene, rooted in disaffected pockets across suburbia or just from California as a whole. And while Canada has its own unique scene that has somehow remained somewhat relevant on the radio to this day, if you cross over to the UK, well, beyond an act like, say, Neck Deep that managed to break a few years ago, there's very little there with consistent name recognition. At least that's one I managed to see in my research. So I'll admit, I was a little bit surprised to hear about You Me at 6, a UK pop punk act from Surrey that released their debut in 2008. In other words, right into an oversaturated scene that guaranteed they would have a hard time standing out. But having gone through their discography leading up to this review, and if I'm gonna be very brutally honest, that might have been hard regardless. To me, their two biggest influences are mid-period Jimmy Eat World and early Fall Out Boy, but less anthemic and heartfelt in the former and less unique and overwritten in the latter. In short, they didn't really stand out all that much to me, not helped by records that ran long and a lack of immediately distinctive storytelling and wordplay. They weren't writing interesting songs for me. They got a little angrier on Sinners Never Sleep, which more often than not translated to a lyrical obnoxiousness that it didn't have the charisma, wit, or firepower to back it up. And while shades of maturity began to slip in on Cavalier Youth, it only came through in a small selection of songs that only ever rose to being good, not great in my books, with the rest kind of really blurring together. I don't really remember a lot of that album. To me, they always seemed a bit more like a singles act. A few good songs, but you would never get through an entire album and find it interesting. So I have to admit a lot of trepidation going into Night People, which is reportedly heavier, but also their shortest album to date. Okay, kind of promising. At the very least, I didn't expect this to be bad per se, so did You Me at 6 deliver something that I could like? Well, if I'm being brutally honest, not really. The more listens I gave to Night People, the more I was absolutely convinced that You Me at 6 have reached a point in their career where they're at least aware that the pop punk scene has spawned them, has left them behind, which leads to an album that tries to be a lot of things in modern rock and overall doesn't end up as much of anything. I'm not saying this is outright bad. It's certainly listenable rock music for the most part, but even I get less of a sense of coherent identity from this group than usual. And nearly 10 years into your career, that's a really big problem. And let's start off with the instrumentation and production. See, at their best, as I described earlier, You Me at 6 could walk the line with some anthemic, occasionally a little bit abrasive songs with a more prominent guitar line. And for the large part, those elements do cross into Night People, like on the title track. With a rugged stomp of that groove, I kinda got into it, because it might as well be a Black Keys or White Stripes leftover. And that issue persists when you get to the next song, which might as well be Album Filter from Queens of the Stone Age. Or on the very next couple tracks with the very liquid guitar work and a more spacious mix and presentation that wouldn't be out of place on modern pop rock radio from an act like The Script. Now, I'm not precisely complaining about this. I don't mind acts sounding like Queens of the Stone Age or the White Stripes as a good template to draw upon. But if you're gonna go in that rougher direction, you need to have some texture or gristle to make it actually connect for me. And not only is the cymbals production muddy as hell across this album, the riffs have a lot more of a buzzy flatness than any sort of real muscle or kick to them to me. Not helped by someone who thought that adding in a bunch of extraneous phaser effects and leaning on the whammy bar was a good idea. It just makes the songs feel cluttered. And the layers of these songs feel really clumsily blended, especially on songs like Heavy Soul or the overly cluttered, weedy groove of Make Your Move. Really disappointing there. There was something there that could have worked. Hell, there isn't even a lot of much of acoustic warmth or texture in a song like Take on the World, where it at least had the mix, had the space in order to build that warmth, but the pickup just doesn't have any depth to it. It seems like a case that instead of letting the existing tones simmer or develop a little bit more deeper weight, they added in more sound and more layers and more guitars in order to compensate, and man, a lot of it feels thin to me. And again, it's not saying that there aren't some good grooves here. The title track, Plus One, Give, especially Can't Hold Back, there is some promise and rollick here I can get behind, and I liked how Spell It Out really built some thicker muscle as the song developed, but this is where we have to consider the rest of these songs, and that includes the vocals and the writing. Now, in the former case, Josh Franceschi, he's a fine enough singer for this sort of music. He's got some versatility, and while I don't think the mix really flatters him with the added weedier layers around his voice or the extremely clean vocal pickup, which doesn't really match or flatter the instrumentation, he handles most of these tracks fine. It probably will go over well live. What I really don't like are the lyrics and themes, mostly because they show that Yumi X6 haven't really evolved when it comes to a lot of their songwriting. On the one hand, if you combine to some of the more swaggering rock tracks like the title track, +1, or the hookup on Can't Hold Back, well, it's not really all that elegant or all that attractive, but it's not really framed as such, and I can kind of get into it in a bitterly sarcastic sort of way. And it becomes abundantly clear that, like the Arctic Monkeys ahead of them, Yumi X6 are characterizing modern life as the refuge of damaged, broken people trying to find any sort of escape from their past and never really getting there. Or when it tries to tap into that, and like on Give or parts of Brand New or Heavy Soul, it's got a little bit of dramatic weight for me. The problem is that the worst instincts of the writing get in their own way. Like on Brand New, where on the second verse it's implied that he's looking for this girl to forget what's happened in her past just so he can step in. Charming. Or take Spell It Out, which with its lines like, I'm not a savior, I ain't no traitor, they're the ones that lie to you. With the very sour tone and framing, it almost rings like 2017's first gaslighting anthem. Just charming there. But that's implying that our protagonist even has that much of an interest in these girls, as Make Your Move is all about not having time for these sort of people. Something that was just kind of implied in the subtext of the meat-headed hookup on +1, but it's really brought to the forefront in the text on that song. Or especially Swear, which falls into Yumi X6's ugly habit of crapping on other bands reminiscing about the past who might say that Yumi X6 drew upon their work to create their stuff. And especially considering how much Yumi X6 are not innovating with their sound and drawing upon other acts to derive any sort of originality, the miserable air of the song is just intolerable. They haven't earned this. And none of it is helped by the fact that many of these songs don't build to really satisfying endings for me. It might be their shortest album to date, but a fair few of these songs, even in the closer, they feel like they were chopped off abruptly mid-musical phrase and doesn't so much leave me wanting more as just kind of exasperated with it all. But really, I'm gonna be very blunt here. I doubt I'm gonna remember this song in a week. Look, this was a band that broke very late on a scene that passed them by and then dissolved. And with Night People, they come across as having even less of a distinctive identity. The hooks are not stellar, the writing is bare bones at best, and there's not enough color, unique personality, or solid production to really grip me or draw me in here. And for a record that wants to run wild in the night, not only does it not feel as dangerous in its textures and sounds, but also it's not even all that fun in a wild, out-of-control vein that could have redeemed it, could have sucked me in. For me, it's a strong 5 out of 10, but only a recommendation if you're a diehard fan. And even then, I'm not sure this is the sound that their fans really want from them. If you're curious, check it out, but otherwise, look, there are other bands that you could be listening to that aren't this. Just saying. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. All Yumi X6 fans, the poll is right there where you guys can all tell me how wrong I am, because I'm very certain that this band has some sort of diehard fan base that wanted me to cover this in the first place. But beyond that, I got a link down in the description if you want to buy the album. If there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get more involved in my scheduling process, the link to my Patreon is right there. 3 times a week you get to vote. Once a week on Saturdays, the higher tiers get to add records or even movies to my schedule. The details are right in the link over there again. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.